Chapter 1. Inside the private room, Willow's best friend was gossiping with her. He's already an adult, and you're still taking care of him. His brother David was the one who assaulted you. Don't you find it disgusting when you see their faces that look so alike? Willow tilted her head back and downed her drink in one go. Her raspy voice carried a hint of painful drunkenness. Disgusting. But don't you think that by keeping him around, tormenting him, and watching him grovel at my feet like a dog, that's the best revenge on them? After all, his brother was the one who loved him most before he died. I withdrew my hand from the door, frozen in place. Although I stood under the warm air conditioning, it felt like I had fallen into an ice cave. So, she was the victim in my brother's case. So, she took me in, got close to me, and rescued me, just to exact a brutal revenge on me. There was a moment of silence in the room, then a burst of applause. As expected, the queen has to be our Willow. I looked at the face in the reflection in the glass, one so similar to my brother's, and memories flooded back from a long time ago. I was 15 then. My brother David, with whom I had always been close, was arrested and sent to prison. 6 months later, he died in jail, and that was when I was branded as a criminal's family member. Relatives despised me, classmates bullied me, teachers ignored me, the whole world abandoned me. In the downpour, in the muddy swamp, I curled up in the stinking garbage pile, bloodied and bruised, and for the first time, I thought about ending it all. It was Willow who saved me as I passed out. She bandaged my wounds and took me home. What your brother did has nothing to do with you. I'll take care of you from now on. Call me sister. I nodded solemnly, clinging to her like a lifeline, desperately trying to earn her favor. She didn't want me to draw, so I stopped drawing. I cleaned, did the laundry, cooked, and obeyed her commands, always at her beck and call. All these years, you've been protecting him like a precious gem. Did you really end up putting your heart into this little wolf cub? A mocking laugh came from inside the room. Willow played with her wine glass, saying nonchalantly, "Do you really think a criminal's brother deserves to be in my heart? It's just a game of taming. Taming a dog means giving it warmth in the abyss, and then creating the abyss again when it's warm. If you keep doing this, it'll see you as its savior and cling to you." Like what? Like encouraging his classmates to bully him even more. My pupils contracted. I could hardly believe my ears. So, the bullying at school, it was her that had orchestrated it all. And I had been foolish enough to think it was some kind of test from her. So I never fought back. The people in the room became interested and began asking questions. "So when did you realize the little wolf cub had feelings for you?" Willow answered every question, seemingly uninterested in these old stories turning into idle gossip. "When he was 17, after I helped him dry his hair in a lace nightgown before bed. The next morning, he washed the bed sheets and there was a hole in them. He's just like his brother, innocent on the outside, filthy on the inside. Actually, I never dared to covet her. I hid my feelings for her, trying hard to be the kind of brother she'd be satisfied with. But that all changed on my 18th birthday. Willow prepared a birthday party for me. After getting drunk, she took my journal filled with my secret affection and barged into my room. One night of heavy conversation. She was no longer my sister, she had become the lover I held dear. That night, I spent the whole night thinking. I thought about how to make money, how to take care of and protect her, and how to be the man I should be. But she once again dragged me into the abyss. She made me walk 20 kilometers in freezing temperatures, wearing a thin shirt, to buy a box of condoms. As my head began to spin from the cold, I still shyly imagined how great tonight would be. But her impatient call completely shattered my last fantasy. "George, why are you so slow? Where's the condom I asked you to buy? My boyfriend is waiting for me in the hotel." I gripped the condom in my hand tightly, desperately trying to suppress my breathing. But the pain in my heart was like a sharp knife, ruthlessly tearing it apart. Now, I finally understood, the turning point at 18 wasn't a sudden shift. It was just her way of finding a better excuse to torment me. Their laughing conversation was like a red-hot knife stabbing into my heart. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I stumbled into the private room, falling hard onto the floor. When I woke up, it was 2 days later. There was no one around me. The room was eerily quiet, only the sound of my heavy breathing echoing in the empty space. After a long time, I let out a bitter laugh and dialed my mentor's number. "Teacher, I've decided to accept the offer for the doctoral program." Chapter 2. Originally, I had planned to refuse the recommendation for the doctoral program. I wanted to stay by Willow's side, find a job at a nearby hospital, take care of her, and be with her. But now, there was no need for that. Since she despised me, I would keep my distance and never bother her again for the rest of my life. I just hoped that she could live a good life and forget the shadows that my brother and I had brought upon her. My thoughts were interrupted when the door creaked open. I turned to see Willow, with an indifferent expression, and her so-called boyfriend, Makoto. Willow brought some food with her. At that moment, the nurse came in to change my bandages and accidentally bumped into her. I instinctively reached out to steady her, but she suddenly changed her expression. She quickly pulled her hand away and wiped her fingers on the blanket, as if there was something dirty on them. I told you, don't touch me without my permission, she said coldly. How many times do I need to emphasize that? Makoto took her hand and began wiping the spot where I had touched with a wet tissue, even scrubbing so hard that it reddened her skin. I had always thought her being a doctor with a bit of a cleanliness obsession was normal, but now I realized that this obsession was directed solely at me. She thought I was dirty. I saw it all, and my eyes lowered, feeling a wave of hurt. I even breathed more shallowly. Even though my heart felt as if it were dead, I still couldn't bring myself to be completely indifferent. The pain inside my chest was sharp and overwhelming. Suppressing all my emotions, I murmured, "Sorry, sister." Upon hearing me call her that, Willow froze for a moment. It had been since I was 15, after she had publicly supported me at a parent-teacher conference, that I last called her sister. Before, I had always called her Sister Willow. A strange feeling flashed through my heart. She sensed the change and, with a probing tone, asked, "Did you hear something that day, outside the private room?" I shook my head. It didn't matter anymore. Willow didn't press the issue but coldly tilted her chin, signaling that I could eat now. Just then, Makoto handed her his backpack. "George, I heard you're applying for a PhD. Make sure to keep up with your studies even while you're in the hospital." He smiled gently, always maintaining that elder's demeanor. He lowered his head, hiding the disgust he had for me in his eyes. Makoto was my art teacher at university, and also my brother's classmate, and I hated Makoto, not just because he was Willow's boyfriend, but because he always filled her head with ideas that I was a dangerous person. One time, as I passed by his office, I overheard him trying to convince Willow, "George is getting older. He already has the potential to commit crimes. As a guardian, you need to regularly test him, to prevent him from slipping through your fingers and causing harm under your watch." Willow didn't respond, but she didn't deny it either. Chapter 3. I took the backpack and pulled out my textbook. A sheet of drawing paper fluttered to the floor, the faint outline of a sketch visible through the thin paper. My pupils contracted. I had once secretly sketched Willow at school, but all those drawings were hidden away in the corner of the art classroom and never made it into my backpack. I looked at Makoto, my expression showing natural confusion, as if I was completely unaware. But Willow's expression changed drastically. "You've been hiding from me and drawing," she exclaimed. It was only after that birthday that I started drawing again, and my sketches were filled with the unspeakable love I had for Willow. Willow, with a cold face, picked up the paper. I hurriedly tried to explain. "Sorry, I didn't mean to draw." But when she unfolded the paper, it turned out to be a drawing of a girl's skirt from underneath. My mind went blank for a moment, and I stammered, "No, this wasn't drawn by me." Willow's eyes were ice cold, and she scrutinized me before saying, "You just admitted it. Now you're saying it wasn't you." After all these years together, she still didn't trust me. I felt like all my strength was drained from me. "I only ever drew you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Upon hearing my words, Willow's expression, which had only held suspicion moments before, immediately shifted, and her voice grew cold. "What did you say?" Her sudden icy tone caught me off guard, but then I quickly realized she had misunderstood my words. I only meant to say that I had only ever drawn her portrait, never anything inappropriate like the skirt. Before I could explain, a sharp slap rang through the room, interrupting my attempt to clarify. I stood there, stunned, as a ringing sound echoed in my ears. Willow spoke, her voice seething with anger. "Just like your brother. You look harmless on the outside but are filthy on the inside. George, making a mistake isn't the problem. The problem is that you refuse to admit it. I'm giving you one last chance. Was this drawing yours or not?" I stubbornly shook my head. Makoto, acting as a mediator, tried to calm things down. "Come on. It's just a drawing. We can destroy it. He's not like his brother. He wouldn't embarrass himself like that." Willow, hearing this, became even more enraged. "Why should we let it go? Destroying the drawing won't erase his filthy heart. He's 20 years old. He's an adult. He needs to take responsibility for his actions. And if we don't discipline him now, do you want him to end up like his brother and go to prison?" Perhaps the incident reminded Willow of her own painful past. She seemed almost hysterical. I suddenly remembered something from long ago. At a parent-teacher conference, someone's parents' watch went missing, and the first person they suspected was me. The only reason they thought that was because I was the only child there with a criminal family background. But Willow had refused to allow anyone to search me in public and had firmly stood by my side, believing that I wasn't the thief. At that time, Willow had been so kind to me. She said, "If you don't admit it, then you won't be going anywhere. I'll lock you in the house until you admit your mistake." I looked at Makoto, and he looked back at me, a smile on his lips. I couldn't be locked up. I still needed to get into the doctoral program. She didn't trust me. She doubted me, no matter what I said. In her eyes, it was just an excuse. Trying to prove myself would only drag me deeper into the abyss, and I could never escape. I closed my eyes and spoke in a low voice. I'm sorry, it won't happen again. From now on, I wouldn't draw Willow anymore. Chapter 4. Willow took a deep breath, thinking I had finally admitted my mistake. Just as she was about to ask who the girl in the sketch was, the door to the hospital room was suddenly knocked. A girl entered, holding some fruit, saying it was from the entire class as a gesture of sympathy. At first, there was nothing special about it, but the girl's appearance closely resembled the girl in the sketch. My heart sank. This was no coincidence. I looked at Willow and met her eyes, which seemed to carry an understanding. She had clearly noticed something unusual. A fleeting discomfort crossed her mind, but she only regarded it as irritation at my improper behavior. She quickly suppressed the feeling and casually asked, "Do you have someone you like at school?" She knew full well how I felt, yet she asked anyway. A wave of sorrow washed over me, and after a long moment, I helplessly shook my head. No, no. From beginning to end, there was only her. Since I turned 18, my heart had belonged to her, but now, that heart was being repeatedly trampled by her. Maria interrupted our conversation, asking Willow, "Sister, my English isn't great. Can George tutor me?" I was about to refuse, but Makoto suddenly spoke up. "George, you don't have any friends at school. That's not good. A normal person needs to have friends. Maria's personality is great. You two get along well. You can't cling to your sister forever, right?" At the mention of forever, Willow's face showed distaste, and her voice became slightly cold. "You two talk. Makoto and I are going to eat." Before I could refuse, they both left, walking out together. As soon as they were gone, I turned to Maria and dismissed her, but she didn't listen. She smiled slyly, looking at me with an eerie gaze that sent chills down my spine. Wong, the top student, has never noticed me. Actually, I've liked you for a long time. I even confessed to you. Do you remember? Maria reached up and touched my thigh, making me almost fall out of bed in shock. I grabbed her wrist, disgusted, and pushed her away. "Get out." She smiled slightly, then began unbuttoning her top. "If you don't agree, I'll tell Lou, sister. I'll say you tried to force yourself on me because I rejected your confession." My pupils contracted as I stared at her in disbelief. "Are you crazy?" Maria theatrically wrapped her arms around my waist. Her overpowering, cheap perfume was nauseating. Furious, I pushed her away. The girl stumbled and fell to the floor, her head hitting the wall, and she groaned in pain. A flash of malice crossed her face. She said, "One's the innocent school beauty, and the other's a criminal's relative. If you were in my shoes, who would you believe?" "They're right. People like you who don't know their place deserve to be taught a lesson." She seemed to have made up her mind, then messed up her hair and began screaming loudly. I wanted to cover her mouth. If this continued, no amount of explanations would clear me. But, just at that moment, Willow and Makoto returned. "Maria, George, what's going on?" Willow frantically knocked on the door. That's when I realized the door, which had been left slightly ajar earlier, was now locked. They slammed against the door, again and again. 1 hit, 2 hits, and finally, with Maria's piercing scream, the door broke open. The first thing I saw was Maria, disheveled, curled up in the corner. Willow took off her coat and draped it over Maria's shoulders. Without waiting for me to explain, she slapped me across the face. I stumbled back, hitting the ground, and blood spilled from the corner of my mouth. Under Willow's hateful gaze, my lips trembled. I didn't touch her. She was the one. Willow interrupted me coldly, her anger growing in her eyes. "Do you mean to say that a girl would ruin her own reputation and chastity just to lie? I'm really disappointed in you." Tears instantly welled up in my eyes, and my heart twisted painfully. I clenched my fists weakly, unable to make a sound. Chapter 5. Makoto leaned down, casting a shadow over my face, and whispered in a tone only the two of us could hear, "You're as stupid as your brother." My pupils constricted. What did that mean? Was there some hidden truth behind my brother's case from back then? A fleeting thought passed through my mind, but before I could grasp it, it disappeared in an instant. I grabbed Makoto by the collar and slammed him hard against the wall. "You set me up." Willow's eyes sharpened, and her nails dug into my wrist, almost drawing blood. "George, let go of him." I didn't want to argue with Willow, but as I let go, Makoto kicked me in the groin. I collapsed to the floor in pain, cold sweat immediately breaking out, but Willow didn't spare me even a glance. She was only concerned about the slight bruise on Makoto's neck. I looked at them, my vision blurry for a moment. Under the harsh lights, Willow's face became a blur. After a while, once Willow confirmed that Makoto was fine, she grabbed my chin, her gaze fixed on mine, and with each word, she revealed the deepest scars in my heart. "Do you know how your brother assaulted his victim? It was because he couldn't get a confession, so he forced himself on her. You're just like him, just as despicable." Willow's gaze shifted to one of utter disgust. I felt paralyzed under her stare. My lips trembled, and the overwhelming emotions left me speechless. I looked like I was trying to put on a brave front, hiding my guilt. After a long silence, I finally managed to catch my breath, my voice hoarse as I grit my teeth and said, "Then call the police. Let the police investigate, and you'll see that I didn't draw that picture. And Maria, who sent her?" Makoto subtly kicked Maria in the leg, and she immediately clung to Willow, wailing, "Sister, don't call the police. If you do, my reputation will be ruined. How will I ever live at school again?" Willow's expression softened as she remembered the rumors she had endured after her own assault. She looked at Maria with increasing pity. Makoto seized the opportunity to speak. "If we can't call the police and he's beyond reasoning, maybe we should hand him over to a professional institution for education." The institution Makoto referred to, I had seen it on my phone before. It was a place that devoured people whole, leaving no trace behind. If I was sent there, I might spend the rest of my life being convicted for a crime I didn't commit. Willow's gaze slowly drifted to me, and she coldly spat out a single word, "Fine." The icy tone sent a jolt through my heart. As Makoto began making phone calls to arrange things, I struggled to get up. I had to go to school. I had to go to school right now. Barefoot, I started running frantically. Behind me, Willow's disappointed cry echoed. I ran faster. The ground was cold and slippery, with stones that jabbed at my feet from time to time. I could feel the wetness under my feet. I must have cut them, but I didn't slow down. I had to prove myself I was a good person. Chapter 6. When I burst into the classroom, everyone was still in class. I frantically tore apart the cabinet in the corner, scattering everything across the floor. Nothing. How could there be nothing? My eyes grew redder, and the tears were firmly held at the edge, stubbornly refusing to fall. It felt like the whole world was against me. Finally, after turning over every last shred of paper, I broke down, knocking the cabinet over and screaming at the top of my lungs, "Has anyone seen my drawing?" The classroom fell silent, everyone staring at me with strange looks. The feeling was suffocating, as though I had gone back 6 years, to that time when I was the hated outsider. I couldn't defend myself, couldn't resist. I muttered, "Sorry." I didn't know what to say, only able to flee in a panic. Just as I was about to leave the door, someone finally reacted. "I think I saw Maria take that drawing album you treasured so much." A shock ran through my chest, and all my strength drained away. Yes. Makoto would have set me up openly. How could he not have left a backup plan? I would never find that drawing. In despair, I walked into the rain, the coldness hammering against my face, so blurring the line between rain and tears. As the sky darkened, streetlights flickered on one by one, and I wandered the streets like a homeless child. Before I realized it, I had found myself in the alley where I first met Willow. Looking into the alley from the entrance, it was pitch black, with only a shabby streetlight casting a yellowish glow, outlining a blurry figure through the slanting rain. She stood under the light, holding an umbrella, just like back then. Was it an illusion? I rubbed my swollen eyes and, unable to resist, walked toward her. Gradually, my pace quickened. When I got closer, the figure raised her umbrella slightly, revealing half of a familiar face. It wasn't an illusion. I abruptly stopped, my arms frozen in midair. I had never forgotten how she repeatedly told me not to touch her. My brother had violated her, and seeing my face was like seeing his. She feared me, hated me, despised me. Raindrops pelted the umbrella, making a popping sound, splashing tiny water droplets. I lowered my head despondently, the heavy weight of reality pressing it down. After a while, I heard the sound of high heels approaching. I looked up to see her walking toward me, every step seeming deliberately slowed, like an old film with a faded hue. Finally, the rain stopped above my head, and Willow slowly embraced me. In that moment, I felt all my grievances had a place to pour out, and I buried my face in her neck, crying out loud, "Sister, I didn't draw the girl's skirt. I didn't touch Maria. Please believe me." She gently patted my trembling back, repeatedly whispering in a soothing tone, "It's okay, I believe you." For the first time in ages, she took my hand and led me home. It had been 6 years since we last held hands. I gathered my courage, wanting to tell her that I had realized she had adopted me to get revenge on my brother. I tried to explain everything to her. "Sister, actually that day I overheard." Suddenly, several burly, menacing figures rushed out of the corner. I instinctively shielded Willow, but someone suddenly slammed something hard against the back of my head. Pain shot through me as I collapsed to the ground, turning in disbelief. "Were you lying to me?" Willow sneered, leaning into Makoto's arms, letting the group of thugs pin me down. "You're the one who lied to me, George. You said you wouldn't like me anymore, but just now, what was that? I only slightly opened my arms to you, and you couldn't wait to crush me in your embrace. Are you that cheap? Do you have to cling to me like a dog for the rest of your life?" Hearing those words, my throat felt like something was lodged in it, suffocating me. I struggled desperately, trying to break free, but there were too many of them. Countless hands pinned down my limbs. Even my head was pressed into the dust under their feet. I could only grasp the edge of Willow's skirt, leaving a dirty, powerless palm print on the white fabric. Sister, I really won't like you anymore. Please, don't send me to the institution. Willow disdainfully kicked me away, a sense of vindictive pleasure growing in her heart, but her words were still coldly spoken. I'm doing this for your own good, George. I can't watch you turn into your brother. You have to become a normal, good person. Chapter 7. The staff at the institution tied me up and dragged me into a vehicle. The ride lasted over 2 hours before we finally arrived at our destination. I was dragged out like livestock, and waiting for me wasn't the type of education where you can just fake being obedient to pass through, but something much harsher, more akin to torture. Makoto appeared before me, dressed in an instructor's uniform, his fake gentleness completely gone. The harsh fluorescent lights cast long shadows on him, making his figure seem menacing and terrifying. He held a solid steel pipe, about the thickness of a finger and as long as his arm. I recognized it immediately. It was that stinger whip. He said, "Dare to compete with me for Willow. I'll make your death worse than your brother's." 2 instructors pinned down my limbs, and I struggled desperately, cursing at them with the most obscene words I could muster. Makoto's smile turned cold and sinister. He circled behind me, raised the steel pipe, and slammed it into my thigh. Just one blow, and I collapsed to the ground, sweat instantly pouring from my forehead. Before I could catch my breath, the second blow came. The third, the fourth. After that, I lost count of how many hits I took. My tattered clothes were drenched in blood. Gradually, I couldn't feel the pain anymore, only the white blur in front of my eyes and the dull buzzing in my ears. Just as I was about to pass out, they poured urine on me to wake me up. Makoto covered his nose in disgust, using his leather shoe to grind my right hand into the floor, his voice dripping with arrogant satisfaction. You know, your brother's right hand met the same fate back then. Your brother's honor, your brother's life, your brother's woman, all of them are mine now. So that's it. I felt a surge of hatred so intense it seemed to tear my heart open. A great power surged from my chest. I shifted my broken hand and grabbed Makoto's leg, biting down hard. Blood spilled from my mouth. Makoto let out a muffled grunt and, in a burst of anger, struck my head with another blow. I lost consciousness completely. I felt like I was in a long dream. In the dream, Willow gently and firmly drove away everyone who had harmed me. She brought me home, sheltered me from the storm, and fed me. But just as I looked up to express my gratitude, her face suddenly twisted into something else. One by one, she pulled out my teeth, telling me I was born to be an evil dog. I deserved to be beaten to death. The sound of water splashing, cold water poured over me, and the sharp pain suddenly dragged me out of the dream. My eyes, unused to light after days of darkness, squinted in confusion as I scanned my surroundings. Several instructors were washing the blood off my body with cold water hoses, and the wounds that hadn't yet scabbed over were carelessly bandaged. Finally, they dressed me in new clothes and forced me, like a puppet, to meet with Willow. Makoto whispered a warning in my ear. You can tell Willow about everything I've done to you, but do you think she'll believe you, or will she believe me? I forced a bitter smile. My body was covered with evidence, but she wouldn't believe me. That's why Makoto felt free to torment me without hesitation. I was shoved onto a cold chair, and Willow looked up. Upon seeing my gaunt, bloodless face, she froze in surprise. She furrowed her brows and gave me a thorough once-over. Makoto says you're always causing trouble by refusing to eat. Do you really want to be a piece of garbage like your brother, harming society? If Willow were to observe me from a doctor's perspective, she would know that my current state couldn't possibly be caused by refusing food. But at that moment, I no longer had the energy to defend myself. I opened my mouth with great difficulty, every breath sending sharp pain through my body. Sister, I know I was wrong. Before I could finish, I couldn't hold on any longer and collapsed heavily to the floor. This time, just as she wanted, I lay at her feet like a dog, groveling and pleading with her to take me away. I didn't want to die. I couldn't die. I needed to clear my brother's name. Chapter 8. When I opened my eyes again and smelled the distinct antiseptic scent of a hospital, I was momentarily disoriented. All the lights in the room were on, bright as daylight. I winced in pain, my heart pounding with fear, and the tormented images from earlier kept replaying uncontrollably in my mind. The nurse, who had been administering the 4, saw that I had awakened and finally relaxed. You're awake. Your sister personally performed the surgery on you. I've never seen her so anxious, not even when we've worked together all this time. She said, she stayed by your side for 2 nights. She just went to rest for a bit last night. Listening to the nurse, I didn't show any reaction. Would Willow really worry about me? She probably feared that if I died, she wouldn't be able to continue tormenting me for her revenge. The nurse continued, it's a shame that your right hand didn't get medical attention in time. You won't be able to paint or play the piano anymore. Hearing that, I finally showed a hint of rage. I repeatedly touched my right hand, which was now in a plaster cast. I remembered how my brother used to hold his right hand, teaching me how to draw. He proudly said I was more talented than he was, and that I would definitely become an outstanding artist one day. And now, both my brothers and my life had been stolen by Makoto. My phone, which had been confiscated earlier, was placed on the bedside table. I struggled to unlock it with my left hand, hoping to check for any news about the guaranteed admission. Just then, Willow entered, her face cold and her eyes full of suppressed anger. She shoved her phone in my face, showing me a trending topic online. I raised you with my own hands, taught you to be a good person. Is this how you repay me? She shouted. I frowned. The diary filled with affection that had been secretly photographed and posted online was now being shoved in my face, and the account that posted those pictures was mine. The timestamp showed it was posted just an hour ago. It had to be Makoto's doing. My phone had been taken away from me at the institution. I gritted my teeth in frustration, just about to explain myself, but before I could, a group of reporters barged in, surrounding us without giving us a chance to explain. Miss Liu, what is your psychological state after raising your enemy's brother? One reporter asked. Miss Liu, did you develop a pathological affection for David after the night he violated you? Is that why you're keeping someone who looks like him so close? Another reporter probed. The reporter's harsh words ripped open the wounds that Willow had so painstakingly started to heal, exposing them to the public again. Willow's face instantly turned as pale as death, and her fingers unconsciously clenched the edge of her clothes. I raised George so I could turn him into a good person. I didn't want him to follow in David's footsteps, she said, trying to stay composed. But before she could finish, the reporters seemed to find a bombshell and became even more aggressive, pushing the microphones almost into Willow's face. Do you think your education was successful? After all, he fell in love with his sister-in-law. Sister-in-law. Willow detested that term with every fiber of her being. She bit her lip hard, the sharpness of her teeth cutting through the skin and drawing blood. Makoto tried to push his way forward, but he was also surrounded by the reporters. Mr. Ito, one of them asked, is it true that you sent George to an institution and caused him to suffer severe injuries in the process? Mr. Ito, George is already an adult. Doesn't this constitute illegal detention? The reporter's questions grew more pointed and relentless. In order to protect Makoto, Willow made a quick decision and gave up on me without hesitation. I'm afraid my education failed, she declared loudly. I thought I could change his criminal genes, make him into a good person, someone useful to society, but I didn't expect I would raise him into a pervert who steals pictures of women's skirts, and a tumor who almost violated others. I should never have raised him. He's an unredeemable ingrate. As soon as she said this, everyone forgot about Makoto. They all turned their gaze toward me. Unexpectedly, I felt surprisingly calm. I had already experienced so much disappointment. I knew that continuing to defend myself was futile. I simply remained silent, pressing the call button. The doctor arrived shortly after, accompanied by security, and they escorted the unwanted visitors out. Willow finally sighed with relief, her face still stern. George, delete those pictures right now, she ordered. I handed her my phone without showing any expression. It's already deleted. Willow. Chapter 9. Willow frowned and scolded coldly. Don't think that just because you call me by my name, the difference in our statuses suddenly disappears. George, I will always only be your sister. I froze for a moment before realizing what she meant. She had misunderstood me. I couldn't help but find it somewhat laughable, but I didn't say anything further. I merely shifted my gaze, expression cold, and looked out the window. No, you're not my sister. You never have been. Upon hearing my indifferent tone, she felt an inexplicable sense of unease. For once, she asked, why are your injuries so severe? Is it because you refused to listen and misbehaved at the institution? It was probably something Makoto had told her, and, as usual, she believed him without question. I turned my back to her in silence, pulling the blanket over my head. I'm tired, I muttered. After staying in the hospital for a month, I was finally discharged. Willow and Makoto came to pick me up, but as soon as we got home, they locked me in the bedroom. I wasn't particularly anxious, but I pretended to be in front of them. Willow, Makoto, what are you doing? Today's the day of the PhD exam. Let me out. A hint of guilt flashed across Willow's eyes, but Makoto was right. She had to be harsh for my own good. The exam can wait until next year, but you're staying at home today to undergo Makoto's transformation, she said. Makoto again. It wasn't easy to pretend that I wasn't hurt, but I forced myself to endure it. I slumped against the door, despondent. Willow, if you ever find out that you've wronged someone and caused their death, what would you do? Willow crossed her arms in front of her chest, took a deep breath, and exhaled slowly, as if she were at her limit. Are you threatening to commit suicide again? She asked, her voice tinged with annoyance. maybe afraid that I'd actually do it. Willow took a few steps forward before stopping and walking back. She tiredly rubbed her temples. As long as you behave, I'll make you your favorite braised pork tonight, she said softly. The sound of footsteps faded as she left. I couldn't help but tug at the corner of my mouth. Perhaps, in her eyes, I was just like a loyal dog, summoned whenever she needed me and dismissed when she was done. No matter when, I would always wait for her. But now, I no longer wanted to wait. Originally, I had planned to leave after my final farewell, but now, I slowly packed my things, knowing it was time to go. An unfamiliar number sent me a video. I knew immediately it had to be Makoto. In the video, he and Willow were clinking glasses in celebration, congratulating themselves as if they were gods for saving my dirty soul. They had imprisoned me and severed my future, but they said, "We've taken control of a hidden criminal, indirectly saving many people, and benefiting society." How laughable. I had originally planned to leave after the PhD exam. At least I had hoped to say a proper goodbye before I left, but now, I tightened my grip around the bank card. It was my brother's inheritance, only 50,000, untouched by Willow since his death. Perhaps it was time for me to leave early. I thought for a moment, then shakily gripped my wrist and wrote Willow a hasty, crooked note. Willow, goodbye. I took out the spare key I had prepared long ago, grabbed my suitcase, and locked the bedroom door behind me. One last look at the villa where I had lived for 6 years, and I pushed my suitcase out of the house. I clenched the letter that David had sent me, silently vowing, next time, I'll bring my brother's vengeful spirit with me when I see you. Chapter 10. In the evening, after Willow finished work, she instinctively went to the exam hall to pick me up. Seeing students coming out of the exam hall, she suddenly remembered that I had been locked up by her and had missed the exam. She was about to head home when a familiar figure caught her eye. It was Maria, the girl I had almost assaulted. After hesitating for a moment, she decided to get out of the car and follow her. She wanted to give the girl a hug, not wanting Maria to become another version of herself. Willow knew what it felt like to be violated, the fear and trauma, feelings that perhaps could never be healed for a lifetime. Just as she was about to call out to Maria, the girl was talking to her classmate, freezing her in place. Maria, George really didn't come to the exam today. You're amazing. You framed him for almost assaulting you, got him beaten up, and he probably hasn't even been discharged from the hospital yet. Maria sneered. Who told him to like that old woman? Serves him right. She pulled out my sketchbook from her bag. You guys haven't seen this, right? It's all drawings of his sister. It's disgusting. Pretending to be all pure in front of me. Let's see who'll like him in the future. Maria disdainfully threw the sketchbook into a trash can, and the loose pages of drawings fluttered out like snowflakes. Willow stood frozen, staring. Every sketch, each one, was of her, standing, sitting, sleeping, working, various expressions and actions, so vivid and lifelike. One glance was enough to tell the deep, suppressed emotions of the artist. Time seemed to stand still at that moment, every action and thought frozen in place. She couldn't believe it. She blocked Maria's way, unable to fathom that someone would go as far as to frame another person using their own body. So that drawing of the skirt under your book bag, was it also you who placed it there? Her hand trembled, and my pleading face, asking her to believe me, kept flashing in her mind. Willow was hesitant. She hoped to hear Maria say, it wasn't me. Perhaps because of Willow's cold expression, Maria flinched, nervously nodding. Yes, it was me. But she couldn't hear the rest of Maria's words. All she could think about was my red-rimmed eyes when she didn't believe me. The suffering I'd endured in the past days, the beatings, the humiliation, filled her heart with a complex mix of guilt and strange relief. She quickly picked up the scattered sketches, eager to go home and apologize to me. Hurrying upstairs, she hesitated for a long time in front of my door. Her hand lifted to knock, then lowered again. Finally, she sighed deeply and gently tapped on the door. George, your sister knows she misunderstood you. You can come out now. There was no sound from inside, and she thought I must still be angry with her. Of course, after everything I had suffered, how could I not be angry? She unlocked the door with the key but didn't push it open. She wanted to apologize with actions, not just empty words like sorry. The flames on the gas stove flickered, reflecting her focused face. A pot of braised pork simmered slowly, its color becoming more tempting with time. The aroma of meat wafted from the kitchen, and Willow couldn't help but glance occasionally upstairs. But the second floor remained eerily quiet, with no movement. Feeling helpless, she finally decided to carry the food upstairs herself. George, your sister knows she misunderstood you, she called softly. I made your favorite braised pork. If you're hungry, just open the door. She waited a while, but still, there was no response. Her eyes were filled with helplessness, and with a sigh, she gave in. George, I won't press you about posting those love-filled diaries online anymore. I know you were angry at me for not believing you and were just trying to get back at me. After a pause, She gently caressed the drawings, took a deep breath, and finally made up her mind. If you truly like me, I might give you a chance to pursue me. She stared at the door handle with hopeful eyes, believing that as soon as I heard those words, I would immediately open the door. But the minutes passed, and the food in her hands grew cold. There was still no sound from inside. Unable to wait any longer, she pushed open the door. The room was empty, and only the crumpled paper on the table was caught by the wind, creating a rustling sound. I had already left. Chapter 11. An indescribable rage surged up to Willow's head as she slammed the food onto the table. You're getting more and more disobedient. How dare you play this disappearing act with me? Do you think just because you hide, I'll go looking for you? She sat down with a stern face and began eating, but her gaze kept drifting to the crumpled note she had balled up. Under her guidance, I had learned to write well from a young age. Who would have thought that after attending the educational institution, my right hand would be ruined? She sighed, and her movements slowed as she ate. She thought to herself that if she hadn't misunderstood me, my hand wouldn't have been damaged. Now, I had run away from home, and I didn't even have any money on me. What would I do if I got hungry, tired, or encountered danger? As these thoughts grew more urgent, her anxiety increased. She grabbed her coat and rushed out the door, bumping into Makoto, who had come looking for her. Come with me quickly. George has run away from home. I have to find her. Seeing that Willow showed no suspicion towards him, Makoto let out a breath of relief and cursed Maria silently for being such a fool. Still wearing a gentle expression, he followed Willow and gently tried to comfort her, attempting to stop her from overreacting. Willow, George is an adult now. Maybe after a few days, she'll come back on her own. Willow shook her head in disagreement. No, I'm her sister. I have to take responsibility for her. Helpless, Makoto could only search with her. Willow believed that I had run away to take the exam, so they waited outside the exam hall all day, but I never showed up. Instead, they ran into my homeroom teacher, George's parents. He was given a recommendation for the university. Who are you here to accompany for the exam? Willow froze. What did you say? He was recommended. The teacher was surprised. Yes, George was already recommended to the Capital University's law department. Didn't he tell you? Willow frowned. Capital University, isn't that where David went to school? Could it be that I deliberately chose to go there just to make her mad? But how could I afford the tuition? Suddenly, she thought of something, rushed home, and started rummaging through the drawers. Sure enough, the card David had left for me was gone. She sighed in relief. As long as there was money, things would be okay. As for her anger at my leaving home, it had already faded during the days of searching for me. And the note, didn't it say, goodbye, Willow? George probably still wanted to meet her again. It was just that I was angry, so I intentionally avoided her. She smiled helplessly. Even though I had said I no longer liked her, the note was filled with the hidden feelings I had for her. Forget it. When school starts, I'll go find her. After waiting for half a month, Willow finally endured to the start of the school year. She immediately took leave, bought a plane ticket, and hurriedly flew to Capital University. At the registration office, she found out which class and dorm I was in, and she rushed straight to the male dormitory. Sure enough, George was there. I had come early, and the dorm was empty except for me. George. It had been a long time since they had seen each other, and an uncontrollable sense of sourness rose in her heart. She looked at the man before her. He seemed stronger, and his skin had darkened. Unconsciously, she approached, wanting to take his hand and examine him carefully. But to her surprise, I expressionlessly raised my hands, took 2 steps back, and distanced myself from her, as though there were something dirty about her. Miss Liu, I think it's better if you stay away from me. After all, you're so clean, and I'm just some filthy thing. I wouldn't want to touch you, so you don't have to waste a tissue wiping off after. She never expected that I would have this kind of attitude. She didn't understand. She had come to find me, just as I had wished. What more did I want? How much longer was I going to keep up this act? As the anger inside her began to rise, her gaze caught sight of the scars on my hands. Ultimately, her voice softened. George, I know you're still angry with me. You and your brother David are indeed different. Everything that happened was because Maria framed you. I've already reported everything she did to the school, and she's been expelled. The suffering you've endured, I can make it up to you. Even if, she paused, even if you want to be with me, I'll allow it. She said this as if offering a favor, but her eyes betrayed the nervousness she was feeling in the moment. Chapter 12. It felt like I had just heard some absurd joke. A cold smile crept onto my lips, and my voice was sharp and grating, cutting right through her heart. Please. I can't afford to climb that high. Willow's face instantly turned red, her fists clenched, her nails digging into her palms. She took a deep breath, her voice suddenly becoming unusually harsh. George, I've come here. I've apologized. What more do you want from me? I raised you this big, and is this how you repay me by making things difficult for others? I stared at her with a mocking expression. Of course not. As the eldest sister, like a mother, I'll make sure to earn money and pay you back for the raising fees as soon as I can. Her words choked in her throat. Her face alternated between shades of blue and red, and the anger in her chest erupted beyond control. George, this is your last chance. I've booked a plane ticket for 8 a.m. tomorrow. If you don't come to find me by then, we'll never see each other again. Leaving the hotel address, Willow stormed off. She was used to my attentiveness, and she didn't believe that I would stop loving her because of this small misunderstanding. But after waiting all night, the breakfast on the table had turned cold. As the clock approached 8 a.m., she could no longer sit still. Just as she stood up, there was a knock at the door. Her mood instantly lightened, and her lips couldn't help but curl into a smile. She mumbled softly, "I knew it. This brat is just too proud to admit it." She fixed her hair in front of the mirror, a hint of youthful infatuation in her own eyes, which she hadn't even realized. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door, but instead of me, standing there was the hotel manager. "Miss Liu, today is your birthday, and we'd like to give you a complimentary birthday cake." "Happy birthday." Her smile froze, and as she took the cake, her eyes involuntarily scanned the hallway. It was quiet. Aside from the manager, there was no sign of the boy she had imagined rushing to her side. In an instant, a sense of grievance surged within her. No matter how I had been treated in the past, I would always come to comfort her, and today, of all days, it was her birthday. At that moment, an order confirmation call came in. "Hello, this is for the cake delivery. It's been left at the west gate of the school." She was momentarily stunned, but then her brows lifted slightly. So, he was too shy to come directly, and used this little trick to make her stay. If that was the case, she decided to go find him just as George wished and give him a way out. On the other side, I had been waiting for the delivery call as well, but I never received it. Today was one of my dorm mates, Joel's, birthday, and the others had all given him gifts. I had also ordered a cake for him. I was about to call for the delivery when I realized that my contact number hadn't been updated. It was still Willow's number. "George." I looked up, and Willow, holding a cake that was almost identical to mine, was smiling as she walked toward me. Since it was after class, the others were slowly leaving, their curious eyes occasionally glancing at them. "Wow, this is your girlfriend. She's so beautiful. You're such a lucky guy," Joel exclaimed enviously. I just took the cake and confirmed that the name on the delivery slip was indeed mine, before calmly denying it. "No, she's just someone who once helped me with living expenses. Not your girlfriend." Joel's eyes lit up as he quickly pulled out his phone. "So, she's a rich older sister. Add me on contact. Since we're roommates, if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to reach out." She originally didn't want to add him, but seeing my cold expression, she changed her mind. Taking out her phone, she scanned his QR code, but her eyes never left me. Meanwhile, I was casually holding my textbook, indifferent, as I walked away from her, not sparing her even a glance. She stared at my retreating figure in disbelief, then quickly caught up and grabbed my wrist. "George, you bought the cake, didn't you? To celebrate my birthday. Where are you going now?" I turned my head with a calm expression, my dark, clear eyes devoid of any emotion. "Oh, today is also your birthday." I looked over at Joel, who was still smiling at Willow, and handed him the cake. "Well, it looks like you two can celebrate together." Chapter 13. My tone was flat, as if I were speaking to a stranger, but she remembered that in the past, I used to look forward to her birthday more than anything. It was the one time she would allow me to sit with her on the sofa, lighting a small, warm nightlight. When she closed her eyes to make a wish, she could feel my unwavering gaze, like a piece of chewing gum that would forever cling to her. She used to hate that feeling, that sticky, disgusting gaze, which reminded her of that terrifying night, but for some reason, when she thought back to it now, all she felt was warmth and heartache. Back then, I was still so young, yet she had placed all her hatred for David on my small shoulders. "George, today is my birthday." She pushed through the crowd, for the first time ignoring her image, and screamed desperately at my retreating figure. Her hoarse voice was broken with trembling, but I still didn't turn around, not even pausing my steps. After lunch, I went to the painting classroom. The curtains fluttered with the wind, the sound of crickets chirped outside, and the distinct scent of oil paint lingered in the air. Everything seemed unchanged from 6 years ago, when my brother would sit in the corner by the window, holding her in his arms. Thin sunlight streamed in, casting a beautiful golden glow over his large hand and the unfinished oil painting. He said he had fallen for a girl, a student from the nearby medical university. Although she always spoke coldly, he knew she was a kind person. Only much later, when I carefully recalled the details of that time, did I finally realize the unfinished painting was of Willow. "George." I didn't turn around. I knew Willow had been following me for a long time. If this classroom wasn't the one where my brother had allegedly assaulted her, Perhaps she wouldn't have hesitated so much and wandered outside instead of coming in, behind me. The sound of high heels grew clearer. Willow said, "George, I've been following you all day. I even made an exception to come into this classroom for you. Can you give me a chance to make it up to you?" I picked up the paintbrush. It was such a light weight, yet my hand trembled uncontrollably. I didn't understand why she could speak of forgiveness so easily. "Some mistakes can't be fixed," I said. Just as I was about to put down the brush, Willow suddenly grabbed my hand. Her hand was cold, and only then did I realize her face had taken on an abnormal red hue. It seemed like she was suffering from heat stroke, but she hadn't noticed. "I'll do anything for you, as long as you say it," she said. "George, I really want to earn your forgiveness." Upon hearing this, I merely sneered, looking straight into her eyes with utter mockery. "Miss Lou, stop pretending. I heard everything in that private room. I know you took me in just to get back at me. So what are you doing now? Trying to pull an out-of-control dog back into your cage?" Her face turned pale, and she opened her mouth to explain, but I didn't want to give her a chance. I lowered my eyebrows and, without warning, leaned toward her. The shadow cast over my face as I inched closer to her. In a daze, Willow seemed to see the same cruel expression that David once had. Her breath caught, and she staggered backward in fear, not even noticing the easel behind her. As she fell with a loud crash, I watched her fall from above, my disgust for her reaching its peak. "See, you've never seen me and him as separate people, so stop following me. I don't want to see you anymore." She stood frozen, staring at my retreating back, an indescribable pain swelling in her heart. She had once looked forward to seeing my collapse when I learned the truth, but now, recalling the face so similar to David's, she couldn't feel any joy. She didn't know what was happening to her. Her mind, a tangled mess, was flooded with memories of me trying to please and serve her. She had thought she treated me like family, until she received the phone call from Makoto, asking her to stop pretending and start acting for real. She refused without hesitation, but suddenly, my shy face when I confessed to her flashed in her mind. Only then did she realize that, as proud as she was, the reason she had been so willing to lower herself and run after me was not just to make amends, it was because she had already fallen in love with George. Chapter 14. Leaving the classroom, I passed by the on-campus gallery. An oil painting caught my attention. Both its contours and colors were almost identical to the one my brother had painted, the one I remembered so clearly, but the artist's name on the painting was Makoto. This is Makoto's famous work, though the fireflies in the painting are somewhat unnecessary and ruin the tone of the piece. A calm and gentle voice came from behind me. I turned around, and the woman looked at my face in surprise. "David," she muttered, instinctively, but quickly realized she had mistaken me and smiled apologetically. "Sorry, you just look so much like an old friend of mine." I was a bit surprised, as everyone's attitude toward my brother after the case was either hatred or disgust, but this woman was different, and it made me feel a bit more favorable toward her. My gaze fell to the name tag hanging around her neck. Anna, oil painting faculty. Anna, isn't she the young artist who became famous online? I remember she and my brother were in the same class. I was suddenly enlightened. Perhaps she could be the breakthrough I needed to clear my brother's name. "Professor Sue, I'm David's brother. George, could you tell me more about what happened back then?" I asked eagerly, but as soon as the words left my mouth, I regretted it. The question seemed too abrupt and rude, but Anna didn't mind at all. In fact, she even stopped smiling, and her expression grew serious. Actually, back then, she was about to speak about the past, but suddenly, Willow appeared, cutting off the conversation and putting herself between Anna and me. "Anna, you defended David so vehemently back then. Do you still want to influence my brother today?" Anna showed a helpless look at Willow's hostility. "I just think there are still some unanswered questions about what happened back then." Before she could finish her sentence, Willow interrupted sharply. "Do you think I would be confused enough to not recognize the person who assaulted me?" "I didn't mean that." Anna tried to explain, but Willow wasn't willing to listen. She grabbed my hand, trying to pull me away, but after a few failed attempts, she stopped in disbelief, glaring at me with cold fury. "Do you believe her?" I didn't answer. Instead, I turned to Anna and said apologetically, "Professor Sue, could we schedule another time to talk more about what was mentioned earlier?" "All right, I'll be in my office tomorrow afternoon. You can come by any time," she replied. Once Anna left, I finally looked directly into Willow's slightly red eyes. "Miss Lou, I think I've made myself clear. I don't need your compensation. Please, don't disturb my life anymore." I carefully pried her fingers off my hand, making sure to distance myself from her with every word. I didn't want her to be an obstacle in my investigation into my brother's case. Seeing my firm demeanor, Willow felt her mind become a jumbled mess. She repeated again and again, "But I want to make it up to you, whether you need it or not." I sighed in frustration, pressing my fingers to my temple, just wanting to get rid of her quickly. "All right, Is it true that once you've compensated me, you'll leave me alone? Willow thought I was finally going to give in. She nodded seriously. Yes, even if you want me to be with you, I'll agree. I rejected her without hesitation. No, I don't want to be with you. I don't like you anymore. Besides, you're already with Makoto. So please, stop bothering me. Her face showed a mixture of surprise and realization, and then she seemed to find it a bit amusing. So you're jealous, huh? She tried to reach up and pat my head, as she used to, but I dodged her touch. Chapter 15. Willow helplessly tugged at the corner of her mouth and softly explained. George, Makoto and I have been old friends for many years. Our relationship as a couple was just to make you jealous. Back then, your diary filled with admiration stirred my heart, and I thought I had always seen you as a little brother. But over the past few days, I've slowly come to understand. Her ears turned slightly pink, and the coldness of her face was softened by a faint blush on her cheeks as she gently took my hand. Let's forget all the hatred from the past. Okay, let's not talk about your brother, or about the injury to my hand. But I felt exhausted, as if she no longer understood what I was saying. I don't want to repeat myself. Miss Liu, I'll say it one last time. I don't like you anymore. I forcefully pulled my hand out of hers. Looking at my firm and indifferent eyes, her face finally showed a shocked, uncomfortable expression. This can't be. You're lying. My fingertip traced the faint pain in my palm and the scar, but I quickly walked away, disregarding her attempts to stop me. I don't care whether you believe it or not. I don't like you anymore. Willow's eyes turned red. She felt dizzy, and the pain in her chest spread through her limbs, almost making her collapse. She wanted to chase after me, but my back grew smaller, becoming a distant speck of light before disappearing. A passing teacher noticed she was unwell and helped her to the infirmary. There, she learned that she had suffered from heat stroke. After a moment of hesitation, she sent me a message. In the past, just a cough from her would make me panic, and I would stay up all night, serving her tea and taking care of her. The next morning, I'd be wrapped in a thin blanket, curled up by the door where I had slept the entire night. But now, even though her 4 was almost finished, I still hadn't replied to her message. I wasn't anywhere near the door either. In that moment, she truly felt it. George really didn't like her anymore, but she had liked him for so many years. How could she just give up on this relationship so easily? Was it because of what she had said before, I only took care of George to get back at him? Or was it because she had rejected him so many times that she had disappointed him? She sniffled, and if that was the case, then she could chase after him, just like he had chased after her. Under the men's dormitory, the summer rain came suddenly. A roommate patted my shoulder and forcibly dragged me out to the balcony. George, the benefactor has been waiting downstairs for you for a long time. Do you think she likes you and wants to pursue you? Look at this weather. The rain is pouring so hard. You should go downstairs and tell her to go back. I expressionlessly glanced downstairs, seeing the miserable figure I had never seen before, but there was no joy in my heart. I only hoped to get rid of her quickly and clear my brother's name. If she wants to get drenched, let her, I said, turning back inside to sit down, absently flipping through a book. But didn't she sponsor you? You shouldn't treat her like this. It's not good. One of the roommates added. The others nodded in agreement, looking at me like I was a traitor. I don't know what happened between you two, but no matter what, you shouldn't treat a woman this cruelly. I sighed helplessly and took the umbrella, heading downstairs. On the way, I glanced at the time. My meeting with Anna was about to begin. The pouring rain hammered down on Willow's frail back. The wind whipped around her trembling legs, and she was shivering from the cold. When she saw me walking toward her with the umbrella, she thought I had finally come to care for her again. Just like before, she couldn't help but smile and opened her arms, trying to fall into my embrace, but I brushed past her without a second glance, letting her fall to the ground without even acknowledging it. In a daze, she felt like she might have cried, but I would never feel sorry for her again. Chapter 16. In the end, I called an ambulance for Willow, but I didn't wait for it to arrive. Instead, I went directly to Anna's office. By the time I reached her office, the rain had stopped, and Anna was lying on the desk, taking a nap. Her long hair was a bit messy, spread out across the desk, gently swaying with the breeze from the air conditioning. I tiptoed to her side, hesitating for a moment before gently poking her arm. Sue, Teacher Sue. Anna slowly opened her eyes, rubbed her sleepy eyes, and gave me a shy smile. You're here. Let's go to the hallway to talk. I picked up the thin blanket that was hanging on the back of her chair and handed it to her. The hallway is a bit cold. You just woke up, so you should put this on. She smiled and accepted the blanket, naturally draping it over her shoulders. In the hallway, we found a quiet corner with no one around. By this time, Anna was fully awake and began recounting the events from back then in a few brief sentences. According to Willow, David had asked to meet her in the art studio, supposedly to confess his feelings, but when the men assaulted her, the studio was pitch black. She couldn't see the perpetrator's face, only the bodily fluids left behind, which could identify the attacker. She immediately called the police and went to the hospital for an examination. After the police investigation, they found that the only two people without an alibi at the time were Makoto and David. Finally, after comparing the bodily fluids, the police confirmed that David was the perpetrator. I thought for a moment, so, the only evidence that could prove my brother was the perpetrator was the bodily fluid. I remembered what Makoto had said, and I strongly suspected that Makoto was the real criminal. If that was the case, the only conclusion I could come to was that Makoto had bribed the doctor to falsify the report. I couldn't think of any other explanation. "Thank you, Teacher Sue," I said. "No need for that, David. You can just call me Anna from now on." I smiled and agreed, then exchanged contact information with her. "Can you tell me where this doctor's hospital is? I'd like to ask him directly." "Third People's Hospital, Dr. Luis." "I'll go with you. I've always thought there was something off about this doctor, but I never had any evidence." Just as she finished speaking, her phone dinged with a message. She smiled helplessly and explained that she had been suddenly called to a meeting. "It's okay, Anna. I'll go by myself," I said. After asking around multiple times, I learned that Dr. Luis was currently making rounds in the hospital rooms. I gently knocked on the door and entered, only to see a familiar face. To my surprise, Luis was Willow's attending doctor. When he saw my face, there was a clear flash of fear in his eyes. This confirmed my suspicion. This Luis was definitely not an ordinary person. After all, if he had no guilty conscience, why would he remember the face of the criminal from 6 years ago so clearly? Dr. Luis. I wanted to approach him to talk further, but Willow grabbed my wrist. Her pale face held a trace of hope. "George, are you here to see me?" Just as I wanted to say something, I impatiently shook off her hand and turned to leave. "No." She struggled to suppress the bitterness in her heart, stumbling as she blocked my path. "I don't believe it. If you're not here to see me, why are you specifically looking for my attending doctor?" I choked up, not wanting her to know I was searching for evidence to clear my brother's name, but I also didn't want to waste time explaining it to her. "This has nothing to do with you." I roughly pushed her aside and urgently searched for Luis. Behind me, I didn't notice that a frail figure had been following me every step of the way. Chapter 17. Luis returned to his office, and I tried to close the door, but I quickly held the doorframe. The door slammed heavily against his fingers, causing him to grunt in pain, but he firmly wedged himself into the door, not backing down. Through the narrow gap, I could see half of Luis's guilty eyes. With a forceful push, he barged inside. Luis was pushed back by the sheer force, stumbling and nearly falling to the ground. I caught him and observed his expression with a hint of suspicion. "Doctor, why are you running away?" Luis didn't answer. Instead, he clutched his chest, trembling as he took some medicine and then ordered me to leave. "Sir, this is a doctor's office, not a place you can just come and go as you please." I wasn't intimidated by his stern expression and tightened my grip on his wrist. "Doctor, I just want to ask about my brother David's case." Luis's pupils shrank, and there was a flicker of tortured fear and struggle in his eyes, but he ultimately suppressed it, pushing down his emotions. "Sir, if you want to know about David's case, it's more appropriate to speak to the police." Despite my repeated probing, Luis only responded with a few short sentences, and I was left with no choice but to give up for the moment. As I was about to leave, I noticed a framed photo on his desk. It was a picture of Luis with a girl in a hospital room. The girl seemed to be sick. I couldn't help but ask, "Dr. Luis, is this your daughter? Is she ill?" Luis ran his fingers over the photo frame and nodded bitterly. "Yes, leukemia. The bone marrow transplant didn't succeed. She passed away 3 years ago." I apologized with a heavy heart and opened the door, only to find Willow standing in the doorway. Our eyes met, and for a brief moment, the air seemed to freeze. Her face was dark, filled with both pallor and disappointment. "George, were you looking for Luis just to question him about the past? Do you think I, as the victim, can't tell who the perpetrator is? Or are you just trying to shed the label of being a criminal's family member, even if it means exonerating a criminal?" Willow's voice grew increasingly agitated, and eventually, she covered her eyes, unwilling to let me see the tears in them. I opened my mouth, sighing helplessly. "I just feel like there's more to the story, and Anna thinks so too." At my words, she froze for a moment, then suddenly yelled at me as though feeling betrayed. "So it's her. She had an ambiguous relationship with David back then. George, I raised you for 6 years. How could you believe the words of an outsider and turn against me?" At that moment, her tears finally fell uncontrollably. This was the first time I had seen her cry. To me, she had always been a strong woman. So many things I wanted to argue got stuck in my throat, and I couldn't bring myself to say them. After a long pause, I sighed and pulled out a pack of tissues from my pocket, handing them to her. "Please don't say that about Anna. As for my brother's case, I just have some doubts that I want to resolve. Besides, Didn't you also believe Makoto back then and send me to that institution? She was momentarily stunned, clutching her chest, trying to say something, but the words stuck. However, I didn't want to argue anymore because I knew that this kind of argument was meaningless. Go back, Miss Liu, until I find the evidence to clear my brother's name. Arguing about this is pointless. She shook her head firmly. No, you must promise me. No more looking for Luis. No more thinking about clearing his name. She gripped my wrist tightly, and we stared at each other, like two cliffs that could never be crossed, both refusing to budge. The subtle tension between us was broken by Makoto's sudden appearance. Willow, why aren't you resting in your ward? I've been looking for you for a while. Willow quickly wiped her tears, as though not wanting to reveal her vulnerable, stubborn side. It's nothing. Let's go back. Makoto glanced at the nameplate outside the doctor's office, and a shadow passed over his gentle eyes. He wrapped his arm around Willow's shoulders and gave me a look that seemed to assert his claim over her. I didn't pay much attention to him. The most important thing right now was clearing my brother's name. Chapter 18. After comforting Willow, Makoto gently closed the hospital room door. He stopped Luis, who was about to leave for the day, and exchanged a few words with him. Luis, looking troubled, waved him off. Don't worry, I haven't told him anything. Makoto forced a smile and nodded, but while Luis wasn't looking, he secretly swapped Luis's fast-acting heart pills. Watching Luis's retreating figure, Makoto's smile turned sinister. Only the dead can truly make me feel at ease. Meanwhile, I was still hoping to have a conversation with Luis. As I followed him, I was on the phone with Anna. After you left, I looked into Luis. I heard that his daughter's leukemia treatment couldn't get the necessary funds, and she was always waiting for a suitable bone marrow donor. But after your brother died, she suddenly started getting surgery. I stopped in my tracks, my voice becoming hoarse. Are you saying that after my brother died, his bone marrow was donated to Luis's daughter? Now everything made sense. If that were true, then why would Luis cover for Makoto's lie? I'm not sure. This is just speculation. There's no evidence. Turning the corner, suddenly a car came speeding toward Luis. Losing control, the car almost grazed his clothes as it sped past. Luis was so frightened that his heart condition flared up, and he trembled as he took his medication, but still felt something was wrong. Noticing the unusual situation, I rushed forward. Dr. Luis, what's wrong? Luis collapsed to the ground, struggling to breathe. He clutched his chest, gasping for air but unable to speak. His fingers twitched as the pills spilled out of the box onto the ground. I noticed this detail and asked urgently, is there something wrong with the medicine? Luis nodded with difficulty. I quickly scanned the surroundings and rushed into a nearby pharmacy. Fortunately, when I returned, it wasn't too late. After taking the emergency heart pills, Luis finally regained some stability. Leaning against the railing, he was still in shock, his voice trembling with regret. It's him. It has to be him. I grabbed Luis by the shoulders, desperate to ask, who? Makoto. He must have switched my medicine in the office. Luis wiped the cold sweat from his forehead, his face pale with guilt. It's my fault. It's all my doing. If I hadn't agreed to help him back then to raise money for my daughter's surgery, I wouldn't be in this mess. When the truth finally became clear before my eyes, I found myself at a loss for words. The buzzing in my ears and the pounding of my heart in my chest felt deafening. In that moment, my eyes welled up with tears, as though all the grievances I had suffered over the years had finally found a way to be released. Maybe it's karma. I killed your brother, and my daughter died on the operating table. Luis's voice choked with emotion, and his old face was filled with remorse for his actions back then. I asked quietly, then, would you be willing to testify in court to clear my brother's name? Dr. Luis. He answered softly, yes. I was taken aback. I hadn't expected Luis to agree so easily. After all, if the case were reopened, Luis would be committing perjury, which would send him to prison. Luis saw the doubt in my eyes and forced a bitter smile. He gently stroked his daughter's photo with deep guilt in his eyes. My daughter wouldn't want her father to continue being the villain for her sake. I've made one mistake already. I don't want to make another. When I returned to school, I eagerly shared the good news with Anna. The paintbrush dropped from her hand as she suddenly jumped up from her chair. Normally so composed, she now had tears in her eyes. Just like me. That's great. That's great. She choked with emotion. However, she quickly noticed the scratches on my arm. I casually wiped the dried blood off with a tissue, not really paying much attention. It's probably just a small scrape from when I fell at the pharmacy. It's nothing. Just a small injury. Anna shook her head seriously, opening a drawer to take out some alcohol and medicinal wine. Come here. Let me clean it up for you. I obediently sat across from her, gazing at her serious and gentle expression, which made me lose focus for a moment. All done. When she looked up, our eyes met. The air between us grew charged, the atmosphere shifting, as if it were fermenting uncontrollably. Suddenly, a few teachers walked into the office after their evening class. snapping us out of our trance. We both quickly turned our heads in unison. I stammered, Thank you, Sue teacher." Only then did I realize I had called her Sue teacher again. I touched my burning earlobe, feeling embarrassed, and cleared my throat. "No, I mean, thank you, Anna." A strange thought suddenly popped into my mind, recalling Willow's words. Back then, Anna tried hard to defend my brother. What exactly was the relationship between them? Chapter 19. That evening, I organized the information and filed the appeal. A few well-informed reporters arrived at the men's dormitory. As I was heading downstairs to go to class, the reporters immediately surrounded me in a corner. My roommates and passers-by exchanged glances, gossiping and stopping to eavesdrop. "I heard you submitted your brother David's case from 6 years ago. Have you found new evidence?" "Miss Liu, as a victim at the time, what do you think of Mr. Pei's appeal? Do you think you might have identified the wrong culprit?" I didn't respond, clutching my books, and managed to squeeze through. But during class, everyone started discussing me again. I checked my phone, and sure enough, rumors about me had started circulating online. I glanced at my roommates, who were all avoiding my gaze, just like the people I had encountered in the past. I lowered my head in disappointment. I thought I had already gotten used to this kind of treatment, but now I realized I still had expectations from my friends. After class, I walked alone back to the dorm. Willow blocked my way with a cold expression, pulling me into a corner. The moment I stopped, she grabbed my wrist and immediately began questioning me. "George, are you doing this to get back at me?" Her nails almost dug into my flesh, her eyes cold, yet hiding a barely noticeable vulnerability and pleading, as though she was hoping to hear a different answer. Before I could speak, she interrupted me again. "Oh, I get it. All that talk about not caring about me, not liking me, not needing my compensation, it's all a lie. Actually, you just hate that I tricked you back then. So you want to use the case from years ago to get revenge on me, right?" She rambled on, her grip tightening around my wrist. I frowned and began pulling her fingers off one by one. "I didn't think that way. I'm doing this because, just like the reporter said, I found new evidence and witnesses." Willow's pupils contracted sharply, and she cut me off angrily. "That's impossible." She completely disbelieved me, as she had lived through the events of those years herself. She thought I was just tired of being criticized by outsiders, which was why I was making such a scene. But she didn't know how much pain she was in. She had just barely started to move past the shadows of that time. Why would I keep reopening her wounds? Was it because I liked her and wanted to make up for it? Was that my excuse for constantly hurting her? Then tell me, if David wasn't the culprit, who do you think it was? She let out a cold laugh, and the look in her eyes became more disappointed and pained. Back then, there were only two suspects, Makoto and David. If it wasn't David, then it could only be Makoto. She stared at me, and from my eyes, she saw the answer. "You suspect it was Makoto? That's impossible. Are you holding a grudge because he put you in that institution and caused you to lose a hand?" So, I couldn't take it anymore. I slammed my book onto the desk. The sharp sound drowned out her words, and it startled her. "First of all, it was you who believed his lies and had me locked up." She gave a self-deprecating smile, understanding the hidden meaning behind my words. It was true, I hadn't stopped liking her, but I was still angry with her. "George, tell me, what exactly should I do to earn your forgiveness? Should I act like I did before? Should I wag my tail like a dog and beg you? If that's what you want, then I've succeeded. I can do that for you." Chapter 20. As she spoke, Willow suddenly attempted to kneel before me. I didn't help her up but instead stepped aside, using the opportunity to escape. I truly couldn't understand her thought process. Wasn't I clear enough? "George." Willow tried to chase after me, but her health was fragile after just recovering, and she was too weak. Before she even rounded the corner, my figure had already disappeared. She could no longer keep herself upright, and everything went black in front of her eyes. She almost collapsed. Makoto swiftly caught her from behind, and she weakly murmured a thank you, gently pushing him away to keep her distance. A trace of hurt appeared on Makoto's face. "Willow, what's wrong?" Willow hesitated but decided to tell him the truth. She didn't believe Makoto could be the culprit. She trusted her own judgment. "George found a witness from back then, and there's evidence to reopen the case, but the only suspects back then were you and David. So," she didn't finish her sentence. For some reason, David's agonizing screams when he was arrested flashed in her mind. "I didn't do it, Willow. I was drugged that day." Though so much time had passed, his face remained vivid in her mind. Makoto asked, "Willow, are you suspecting me?" Willow snapped out of it and met Makoto's bitter yet calm eyes. She forced a small smile, gently patting his hand to offer comfort. "Fool, how could I not know what kind of person you are? Of course, you're not the culprit." Yes, they had known each other for so many years. How could she possibly doubt him? She knew he couldn't be the criminal. She repeated to herself over and over, David was the criminal, and he deserved to die in prison. Makoto moved, pulled her into a tight hug, his voice choking with emotion. That's good. I don't care what others say. I just need you to believe me. She didn't notice the shadow that briefly crossed his eyes. In my opinion, I'm just someone who loves you but can't have you. Seeking revenge. Willow, don't worry. I will help you. Willow furrowed her brows. Don't do anything rash. Makoto nodded. I know my limits. I just need to make him back off. Soon, Makoto, once George's teacher, began posting various revelations online. He shared things like George's dark, lonely personality, having no friends, and the fact that George had almost assaulted a female classmate, among other things. With my status as a criminal's family member, I seemed to be born for crime. Netizens began to launch various attacks against me online, and some even found out my school, publicly calling for me to be expelled during my lectures. Why can't the school filter out trash like him? How can someone like this be a PhD candidate? Exactly. He even drew upskirts of female students and almost assaulted a girl. Why hasn't the school expelled him? He even wants to clear his brother's name. The case back then was already settled. So what's there to reopen? I walked into the elective class with a blank expression, randomly choosing a seat. The female classmate sitting in front of me splashed boiling water on my face, and the burn was so severe I could barely keep my expression intact. Don't sit behind us. It's disgusting. The girls huddled together, glaring at me in indignation, and I suddenly felt how absurd it was for me to be sitting in this classroom. One-sided opinions should not be the basis for conclusions. Anna walked in, and her serious, composed voice suppressed all the discussions about me. She didn't look at me, as if stating an obvious fact, but hearing it made my heart inexplicably tighten. Thank you, Anna. After class, I whispered a thank you to her. She smiled at me and gently patted my shoulder. Do whatever you want to do. I'll always support you. Chapter 21. I nodded in gratitude. I had already devised a strategy for dealing with online public opinion. Defending myself directly wouldn't work. Instead, the key was to release more clues and let the netizens draw their own conclusions. For example, if Makoto's famous painting was exposed as a plagiarism, my words would lose much of their credibility. This was one of the clues mentioned in the letter David had left behind. With Anna's help, I compared David's and Makoto's artworks, along with Makoto's famous piece and his recent works, in great detail. Initially, this didn't stir much attention, but with Anna, a well-known artist, vouching for it, the situation began to shift. People started from just watching the spectacle to seriously analyzing the facts. The public sentiment began to change, and soon, my university also made a statement. They clarified that Maria had framed me and had already been expelled. With that, all the rumors surrounding me were debunked. Netizens began to suspect and delve into the past. I heard that there were only 2 suspects in the case back then, and one of them was Makoto. If his painting was plagiarized, could the case back then have more to it? The person above is wrong. What if both of them were bad guys? I heard Makoto once locked George up in an institution like that. Could it be that he wanted to kill him to cover up the past? My appeal for the old case quickly made it to the trending topics, gaining massive attention, and the review process was accelerated, all thanks to Makoto. I sneered, looking at Makoto downstairs, who was ready to confront me, and finally picked up Willow's call. On the other end of the line, Willow quickly began to ask with pained concern, George, if you hate me, then come at me directly. Why do you have to drag Makoto into this? He's innocent. How many times do I have to say it? I wasn't surprised by her words. Instead, I calmly responded with a question of my own. With all this evidence in front of you, are you really choosing to ignore it, Willow? Her voice faltered for a moment, but she stubbornly insisted. George, withdraw the appeal. Willow, are you scared? Scared that if you find out the truth, you'll realize you were wrong. Hearing the sarcasm in my tone, she seemed about to say something, but just then, Makoto barged in. She immediately fell silent. She didn't hang up but quietly listened instead. Perhaps that seed of doubt had already been planted in her heart. George, withdraw the appeal. As soon as he entered, Makoto coldly commanded me. When he saw I didn't respond, he continued. What do you want, money, or Willow? Just withdraw the appeal, and I'll give you whatever you want. I glanced at my phone without showing any emotion and asked in a deep voice. Why should I withdraw the appeal? Is it because when you think back on the past, you're feeling guilty? He cautiously didn't answer, as if he was thinking of something. He pursed his lips and, with a vicious look, delivered a harsh warning. If you're so stubborn, then prepare to lose. Don't think that just because you've studied law for a few years, you've got it all figured out. I'm telling you, reopening the case isn't as easy as you think. The door slammed shut with a loud bang, and the painting studio returned to the same silence as before. Did you hear that? There was a long silence on the other end of the line before Willow finally spoke. He didn't admit he's the criminal, She still stubbornly repeated it, but this time, her voice trembled. It was as if even she didn't believe the words she was saying. Chapter 22. I couldn't help but let out a sharp, cynical laugh. I didn't understand why she was still deceiving herself at this point. George, so you're here. I ordered takeout. Let's eat together. Anna walked in, carrying several bags. For some reason, those words seemed to strike a nerve with Willow. She suddenly turned her anger toward Anna, her voice thick with jealousy. I think it's better if you stay away from Anna. You think she and David are innocent? Ha! I purposely rejected him back then because I saw how close they were. A person who plays both sides. A disgusting criminal. It wouldn't be surprising at all. Without waiting for me to respond, she hung up the phone. The awkwardness filled the room, and Anna quietly began unpacking the food. Her long hair covered her expression, but her tone was as gentle as usual. I actually met David online. We got to know each other through our reviews of the same painting. Later, I didn't expect we would both end up attending the same university, and that's when we finally met. We're just close friends who appreciate each other's talent, and there has never been any improper behavior. The room fell silent once again, the only sound being the occasional chewing that seemed to amplify the tension in the air. I absent-mindedly answered and took a few bites, unsure of what to say. Yet, strangely, an inexplicable feeling of joy rose within me. I was eager to say something, when suddenly, I thought of Luis. By the way, Anna, this is the evidence Luis gave me. It's the forged authenticity certificate he made back then. But with everything happening online, I'm worried Makoto might come after me. I'm afraid I might not be able to keep it safe, so I want to leave it with you. Anna solemnly took the evidence and stuffed it into her bag, holding my hand. Don't worry, I'll keep it safe for you. I nodded absent-mindedly, my eyes unable to avoid focusing on her hand that was holding mine. The warmth quickly withdrew, and I lingered, softly brushing my fingertips, wishing time could slow down. I'll buy you some paint in return. It looks like your paint is running low. Actually, teachers can go to the materials room to get more paint when it runs out. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but for some reason, she didn't refuse. As we left, neither of us noticed that Makoto had returned and was hiding in the corner, his cold, watchful eyes fixed on Anna. At around 9 p.m., Anna finished organizing her lesson plans and prepared to go home. The evening breeze was gentle, and there wasn't a soul on the path. Even though it was a familiar route, she couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister was behind her, like someone was watching her. But when she turned around, there was nothing there. She quickened her pace nervously, but the footsteps behind her grew louder, closer. Suddenly, she spun around, and a figure wearing a hood was right behind her. Their eyes were inches away, staring at her with an eerie intensity. She screamed, her heart racing so fast it felt like it might jump out of her chest. She almost stumbled to the ground. The figure seemed to take pleasure in her reaction, letting out a cold laugh as they yanked at her bag. Her eyes narrowed. The bag contained evidence, crucial for David's case. Thinking of that, she wasn't afraid anymore. Let go. Who are you? Did Makoto send you? The figure didn't respond, but kicked her in the stomach, dragging her along the ground. Despite this, she gritted her teeth and didn't let go of the bag. The figure snorted coldly. You're asking for it. They pulled out a knife, raising it high. Anna, watch out. In a daze, a heavy weight suddenly pressed down on her. She turned around to find that it was me. The knife plunged into my abdomen, and red paint spilled everywhere, mixing with blood in an alarming, vivid sight. George. Chapter 23. Willow, who had spent the entire afternoon in a struggle, finally decided to come find me. At that moment, she saw the scene before her, and her heart almost shattered in agony. She shoved Anna aside and, trembling, knelt down beside me, pressing her hands over my wound. Call an ambulance, you idiot. Turning around, she angrily ordered Anna. If it weren't for this woman, her George wouldn't have to suffer like this. Anna didn't respond to her attitude. She immediately called for an ambulance and tried to help Willow with the first aid, but Willow pushed her away with force. Don't touch him. She guarded me fiercely, like a ruler protecting her territory, not allowing Anna to come any closer. Anna could only smile bitterly and quietly stand some distance away. Anna. Willow hesitated in her efforts to stop the bleeding, her calm eyes betraying a hint of disbelief and pain. She had thought that all those words I had said about not liking her anymore were just to provoke her, but now, she finally had to accept the painful truth that the boy who once put her first, the one who used to love her, truly no longer cared for her. Her eyes filled with tears, and she struggled to control her emotions. But the hand pressing on my artery trembled uncontrollably. 20 minutes later, they finally managed to get me into the operating room. Anna anxiously reached for her phone to call the police. Willow coldly stopped her. No need to call. That person was Makoto. Anna was taken aback. Are you sure? Willow pursed her lips, forcing a bitter smile. I've known him for too long, Anna. His silhouette, his running posture, Every little detail about him. I know it all by heart. Anna tightened her grip on her phone, cautiously probing. So, you don't want me to call the police because you're covering for him? Willow shook her head seriously. No, I'm going to steal the evidence back. She paused, her gaze sweeping over Anna's disheveled appearance, and calmly reminded her. Go put some ointment on. You're not going to help anything by waiting outside the operating room. Anna lowered her head and then realized that her arms and legs were bleeding from the dragging. Seeing the wounds, she finally felt the pain. Thanks for the reminder, Willow. Willow coldly turned her head away and walked off. I woke up hours later, and it was already past midnight. Anna was resting by my bed, her long hair in disarray, frowning in her sleep, clearly restless. When I carefully moved, she woke up immediately. She rubbed her sleepy eyes and looked at me with concern. How do you feel? Is anything bothering you? I shook my head and urgently grabbed her wrist. What about the evidence? Anna, did you call the police? She bit her lip in guilt and told me everything about Willow's plans. That place is in a blind spot for surveillance. Even if we call the police, they might not catch anyone. It's better to trust Willow. I furrowed my brows at her words, hesitating and struggling for a while before finally voicing my concern. But what if Willow went to warn Makoto to escape or destroy the evidence? Anna froze, her expression stiffening. Chapter 24. No way. Willow isn't that kind of person. I gave a bitter laugh. I had seen how Willow acted around Makoto. Her feelings for him were much deeper than mine. Moreover, she had always tried to stop me from appealing the case. If she had the chance to obstruct me, she probably would have destroyed the evidence herself. But I was wrong. The door creaked open, and Willow walked in, looking disheveled. Seeing that we were all awake, she froze for a moment, then awkwardly threw the evidence onto my bed and crossed her arms, her voice cold. Don't misunderstand. I just want you to give up. After a brief silence, she stubbornly repeated the same words. I want to prove that David is the real criminal. She wanted to prove that all these years, she had never been wrong. Soon, the trial began. We had prepared thoroughly, thinking of all the possible questions the opposing lawyer might ask, all the ways they could try to trip us up. We had thought of everything, but what we hadn't anticipated was that Makoto didn't show up. Willow stood in her seat, staring at the empty chair, her face growing increasingly pale, because if Makoto was unwilling to even attend the trial, then all the answers were already obvious. He was guilty. He knew he had no chance of winning. So, he ran away ahead of time. When the judge ruled in my favor, any last flicker of hope in Willow's eyes was completely extinguished. She sat there in a daze, her gaze unfocused. A buzzing sound filled her ears, drowning out everything else. She thought back to so many things, the agonizing screams of David when he was arrested. Her chest tightened, making it hard for her to breathe. Countless reporters swarmed around her, shoving microphones almost into her mouth. Miss Liu, do you feel guilty for causing David's death? Miss Liu, after spending so many years with the criminal, have you developed any strange feelings for him? Miss Liu, Miss Liu. Anna grabbed me and forced her way through the crowd, shielding Willow from the reporters and guiding her out of the circle. Willow looked like she had lost her soul, her face pale and hollow. Willow, it wasn't your fault. You're a victim too. Anna gently pulled her into an embrace, softly patting her trembling back. It seemed like Willow finally found an outlet for her emotions, and tears began to fall one by one. No, I'm not. She covered her face and silently cried. I'm not just a victim. I'm the perpetrator too. I hurt George. Chapter 25. Anna comforted Willow for a long time before she finally fell asleep, her pillow soaked with tears. When we left, we didn't notice a figure quietly emerging from the hotel wardrobe. It was none other than Makoto, the person we had been searching for. Willow lay in bed, clutching a knife tightly in her hand. When she entered the room, she had already known Makoto was hiding there. However, she had something to ask him privately, so she kept it to herself. As the shadow drew nearer, for a moment, she suddenly recalled that night long ago, when she was violated. It felt eerily similar, painful and helpless, but now, things were different. She had grown up, and she could rely on herself. Thinking this, she tightened her grip on the knife. She suddenly opened her eyes wide, and Makoto, startled, froze. Taking advantage of his hesitation, Willow swiftly overpowered him and pressed the knife to his throat. Tell me what happened that night. Makoto raised his hands, but his eyes darted around, seemingly scheming something sinister. Willow, calm down. Tell me. Willow screamed, her voice raw with anguish. Just then, Anna and I returned, bags in hand. Willow was distracted for just a second, and that moment was enough for Makoto to take control. The knife was now pressed against her neck, and he grinned viciously. You wanted to know, right? You liked me, didn't you? Well, let me tell you everything in front of him. The whole scene from that night. Willow trembled. That night, David was supposed to confess to you, so I drugged him. You didn't know, did you? While I was with you that night, he was lying in the corner, buried under a stack of easels. Maybe he woke up already, but he couldn't move. He couldn't do anything. Ha ha ha. Willow's tears fell in streams, but Makoto only grew more excited. The hatred he had harbored for David over the years had twisted his heart. Why does David have everything? Everything he has should be mine. Mine. Makoto grabbed a knife, and we all thought he was going to strike Willow. I lunged at him in a frenzy, but to our shock, he swung the knife at me instead. I couldn't react in time, but just as the blade was about to reach me, a figure threw itself over me, taking the blow. Blood splattered everywhere. Willow. Willow. Makoto's pupils contracted in disbelief. Willow collapsed in my arms, her voice growing faint. I'm sorry, George. I love you. She was still hoping for my forgiveness, hoping for that affection that had once been hers alone. Even in her final moments, I completely lost control. In a blind fury, I pounded my fists into Makoto, hitting him again and again. It wasn't until Anna pulled me away that I finally came to my senses. Makoto lay on the floor, gasping for breath, covered in blood, his face unrecognizable. The ambulance is here. Stop hitting him. We need to take Willow first. Willow looked up at the figure that had rushed to her aid, a sickly smile on her lips. He still loved her. Look, he was so desperate. Chapter 26. Willow woke up 3 days later. The knife had nearly severed her artery, and it had been a miracle that she survived. She asked, "Where is George?" "He's busy with the case. Makoto has been caught and sentenced to 15 years. Willow let out a cold laugh. 15 years? Just 15 years. But David paid for it with his life. Anna sighed and gently adjusted Willow's hair. Don't dwell on this anymore. For several days, I didn't visit her. In the anxious look in Anna's eyes, she finally realized I had been avoiding her. I saved him. Why hasn't he come to see me? Why? Is he afraid I'll repay him by clinging to him again? She grabbed Anna's wrist and asked in a low, tense voice. I didn't know how long I had been standing by the door, but upon hearing her words, I walked in. Seeing Anna's wrist redden from Willow's grip, my usually indifferent expression tightened slightly. Let go of her. I firmly pried her hand open and carefully massaged Anna's wrist. Looking at this familiar scene, a sharp pain pierced Willow's heart. Her chest heaved in agony, and the wound on her abdomen began to hurt again. She curled up in pain, but when she lifted her hand, she realized the wound had reopened, blood seeping out. Yet I still didn't spare her a glance, calmly calling for a doctor to take care of Anna's minor injury. In that moment, the hope that had just sparked in Willow's heart was completely extinguished. I really no longer loved her. The doctor finished dressing Anna's wound, and the crowd in the room dissipated. Willow was left alone, sitting in silence. Once, she had relied on hatred to survive, but now, with that hatred gone and me no longer wanting her, she didn't know the meaning of her own existence anymore. Someone's about to jump. She snapped back to reality and realized she had already stood up by the window, 1 foot even hovering outside. She looked down and saw me walking away below, but the distance was too great for her to see my expression. Would I care whether she lived or died? No, I wouldn't. She had treated me like that before. I should have been glad she was dying, paying for my brother's life. Slowly, she leaned forward. Don't. Suddenly, a familiar shout came from behind her. She turned around and saw me, standing in the doorway, panting heavily with a nervous expression. In that moment, it felt like we had returned to many years ago. Back then, just the slightest droop of her lips would have made me wear the same anxious, concerned look. In an instant, a strange thought and feeling flooded her heart. Maybe if she jumped, I would show more of the emotions I once had for her, perhaps even be heartbroken. So, she tilted her body back, as if seeking release, and whispered to me, George, I know you're still angry with me. Now, I'll give you back your brother's life. One of my hands grabbed her firmly. She looked up in confusion. It was me. To save her, I nearly fell off the balcony. Willow, are you crazy? You're not allowed to die. A twisted smile cracked across her lips. Then, have you forgiven me? I stayed silent for a long time. You've saved me many times. We're even now. Finally, she stopped struggling, allowing me to pull her back up. She collapsed into my arms as she had wished. Chapter 27. The doctor quickly redressed her wounds. I sat by her side, my expression colder than she had ever seen. This is the last time I'll care about you, Willow. The smile that had just appeared on Willow's face froze, and her eyes instantly filled with tears. Bitterness spread through her heart, suffocating her breath. Is it because of Anna? Do you like her? Yes, I like her. I stood up, preparing to leave. David's death has nothing to do with you. You were also a victim, so you don't need to feel guilty. As for me, you took me in and cared for me. That's a fact. Willow, you're a good doctor, so stop doing stupid things like this. I left, without looking back. Finally, she couldn't hold it in any longer. She curled up, disregarding the reopening of her wounds, and cried out in excruciating pain. Overwhelming sorrow engulfed her entirely, and she had never felt so broken before. She had tried everything, but I was still leaving her. I would never love her again. 3 years later, she received an invitation to my wedding with Anna. The combination of those names still made her heart ache. Perhaps it was out of unwillingness to accept it, but she carefully selected a dress and went to attend our wedding. At the door, a photo of Anna and I in our wedding attire was displayed, and passers-by praised us as a perfect couple. She remembered that in the album of my drawings, there had once been sketches of a future, one of which showed her in a wedding dress. The dress had been drawn in exquisite detail, with the pattern of roses she loved so much carefully outlined. Flipping further, there was the dreamlike scene of a wedding hall. Flowers and white fabric softly adorned the space, sunlight filtering through the stained glass windows, casting fragmented, colorful shadows. The groom and bride walked down the red carpet, hand in hand, each step marked by the blessing of everyone present. Then, we exchanged rings and made eternal promises. Under the wedding dress, we shared a gentle kiss, our eyes filled with boundless love and hopes for the future. The loud cheers of the crowd pulled her out of her thoughts. On the stage, Anna and I were exactly as she had imagined, accepting everyone's well wishes. Her eyes reddened uncontrollably. Once, this happiness should have been hers. Actually, she should have left by now, but for some reason, she stayed to witness the toasts. She seemed to want to witness our happiness as a form of self-punishment. Perhaps only then would she truly be able to let go. She forced a smile, though there was a hint of sorrow in her eyes. Willow, I heard you've been promoted to director. Congratulations. The events from years ago had been sensational news, and seeing her now, people couldn't help but gossip. Everyone stopped talking, stopped eating, and all eyes turned to us. The large banquet hall grew eerily silent. Willow had long been used to such stares. Now, these gazes no longer stirred any emotion within her. Thank you, and I wish you a lifetime of happiness. Willow raised her glass and clinked it with ours. She tilted her head back and drank in one gulp. The sourness and spiciness rushed down her throat, swallowing all the bitterness she had been carrying. After the toast, the groom's speech began. She listened attentively from her seat as George calmly spoke about his feelings when she had raised him and the salvation he found after meeting Anna. Those wounds and memories seemed to have been long forgotten by George. Perhaps it was for the best. She lowered her head and quietly left. The rain outside had stopped, and sunlight streamed through the dissipating clouds, warming the ground and her shoulders. It dispelled the coldness around her and the darkness in her heart. So, goodbye, David. Goodbye, George.